pregnant wife's health, at risk millionaire husband, and mistress ignore her calls. A single phone lay buzzing, abandoned on a glossy marble countertop in the hushed hallway of Lenox Hill Hospital. Outside, rain pounded the windows, and the evening sky churned with ominous clouds. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered, illuminating rows of private rooms where expectant mothers clutched at hope and prayers. Among them was Catherine, strapped to a monitor in unimaginable pain, eyes fixed on the screen of her own phone. She tried calling once more, ring after desperate ring, yet no one answered. Fear clawed at her heart, for she was alone when she needed her loved ones most. Every beep of the heart monitor reminded her that her baby's life was hanging in the balance, yet the man who had promised to protect her was nowhere to be found. She pressed call again, tears pooling on her hospital gown. This would be the night everything changed forever. Catherine had grown up far from the glamour of Manhattan's elite circles. She was raised in a quiet Connecticut town where neighbors greeted one another and weekend picnics were a joyful norm. Though her parents weren't wealthy, they instilled in her the belief that genuine compassion and strong morals were more valuable than any fortune. From an early age, Catherine's dream was to become a school teacher who could inspire children, the way her own teachers had inspired her. When she finished her teaching degree, she moved to New York City. The city drew her like a moth to a flame. Its promise of boundless possibilities and cultural diversity captured her imagination. She found a job at a small private school, teaching third graders who challenged her every day in ways that made her laugh, cry, and ultimately feel more alive than ever before. Her humble but comfortable life revolved around her students, evening walks through Central Park, and an old studio apartment that had seen better days but held a charm she adored. One crisp autumn evening, during a friend's birthday party at a trendy lounge, Catherine met Alexander Cole. He was there on business, an informal networking event with real estate developers from London. Fate took a twist when he noticed her from across the room. Where others saw a simple, understated teacher, Alexander saw a gentle glow in Catherine that stood out against the brash backdrop of Manhattan's late-night scene. He approached her, offering a disarming smile and enough polite conversation to make her trust him. Alexander, at that time, was not just any businessman. He was being touted as the rising star of New York's real estate empire. His name appeared in society columns featuring exclusive parties in penthouses overlooking Central Park. People often said he was a man who possessed Midas's touch. Every project he handled turned into unimaginable profit. He was tall, with a confident posture and that specific brand of quiet magnetism that wealthy power players often carry. Despite that, he seemed genuinely interested in Catherine's stories about her classroom, her dreams of writing children's books, and her volunteer work with underprivileged youth in Harlem. What Catherine didn't immediately see was the complicated life he left behind that night. She didn't see the many phone calls from business associates, the swirl of gossip that surrounded him, nor did she understand the web of acquaintances who traded money for influence and secrets for power. All she saw was a man leaning in, listening intently as she recounted how one of her students refused to color inside the lines and insisted that the sky should be green and clouds pink. They began dating casually, but Catherine quickly became an indispensable solace for Alexander. Where everyone else courted him for favors, positions, or financial gain, she cared about him as a person. She cared about his insomnia, his relentless workload, the pressure on his shoulders. She drew him into a world of simpler joys, a Sunday morning stroll through the park, homemade pancakes in a cluttered kitchen, late-night phone calls discussing hopes and fears instead of net worth and stock prices. Around 6 months into their relationship, He confessed he was deeply in love with her. He didn't do it over a fancy dinner or in one of those lavish rooftop gardens he frequently visited. He did it spontaneously, on a Saturday night, as they were binge-watching old sitcoms on her worn-out couch. With tears in her eyes, Catherine told him she loved him too. Within a year, they were married. Everyone said Catherine was the luckiest girl alive. Alexander spared no expense for their wedding, held at an ornate cathedral in the city. The reception was at a 5-star hotel, decorated with crystal chandeliers and thousands of white roses. Society page columnists fawned over the event, calling Catherine the fresh-faced teacher who captured the heart of the city's most eligible millionaire. But behind those dazzling images, Catherine was excited by something more precious, the idea of building a family with Alexander. She saw beyond the glam and recognized that, despite his wealth, he was a man searching for emotional grounding. Their first year of marriage was pure bliss. Catherine continued teaching, although Alexander suggested persistently that she quit and enjoy a life of leisure. She refused, maintaining that her work defined her and that her heart belonged to her students. It was one of the first serious disagreements they had, but they resolved it amicably. Alexander begrudgingly respected Catherine's devotion to her craft, even donating large sums to her school's arts program. Months passed, and their bond seemed to grow. They purchased a townhouse on the Upper East Side, near a cluster of private schools and tree-lined streets. Catherine loved the idea of rearing children in a safer, quieter nook of Manhattan. She and Alexander even talked about where to put the crib one day, how they might decorate the nursery. Alexander joked that he would hire the best interior designer in the city, while Catherine insisted she wanted to paint a mural herself, something personal and filled with love. During this time, new acquaintances entered their lives. Among them was Rachel Martin, a leggy brunette with an eye for wealth and social climbing. She was introduced to Alexander at a gala for an international relief charity, an event Catherine skipped because she felt unwell. Rachel was everything Catherine wasn't: brash, flamboyant, worldly in a way that turned heads, and unashamed to flaunt it. She had a background in luxury PR and was known to fix the public images of powerful men with tarnished reputations. She was rumored to have a string of high-profile ex-lovers, each wealthier than the last. Alexander insisted he was just networking with her for a potential charitable project. Catherine, in her gentle, trusting way, believed him. After all, their relationship had been solid until that point, and Alexander had never given her reason to doubt him. Yet something in Catherine's gut tightened every time she heard the name Rachel. The woman possessed a seductive confidence that spelled trouble. Whenever Rachel's voice came through on Alexander's phone, Catherine felt a slight chill, an intuitive alarm she couldn't quite understand. Months turned into a year and a half. Catherine discovered she was pregnant in the middle of a frantic school day. She'd been feeling dizzy, so she popped into the teacher's lounge and took a test. When the result came back positive, her heart soared. She felt an explosion of joy, picturing the sweet face of a child that would share Alexander's eyes and possibly her own curious, caring spirit. That night, she broke the news to Alexander. She expected elation hugs, tears of joy, promises of being an incredible father. Instead, she found him somewhat reserved. He mumbled something about big responsibilities and how his schedule was very tight with multiple real estate developments in the pipeline. Over dinner, he eventually smiled, squeezed her hand, and promised to do his best. But it wasn't the ecstatic reaction Catherine had dreamed of. In the weeks that followed, she tried to ignore the pang in her chest. Maybe fatherhood was just daunting for Alexander. Maybe he had too much on his plate at work. Catherine attempted to be understanding, offering him space to adjust to the idea. But as her pregnancy advanced, Alexander became busier, and Rachel's presence in his life seemed to multiply. She appeared at business dinners, charity events, even on a quick weekend trip to Boston. supposedly to scout out new investment properties. Catherine's suspicions grew stronger. She wanted to trust her husband, but found it harder with each passing day. A swirl of gossip from acquaintances in her social circle reached her ears. Rachel's always with him lately. They were seen at that new lounge, laughing together. Are you sure they're just business partners? She tried valiantly to maintain her composure and cling to hope. However, a stinging loneliness settled in. The man she loved was drifting away, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Catherine's belly grew with the life they'd created together. By the time Catherine was 8 months pregnant, Alexander was spending most nights away. He claimed it was necessary to finalize a multi-million-dollar deal with foreign investors. Catherine's body ached and her emotions churned. She wanted her husband by her side, sharing the excitement of the baby's imminent arrival, picking out baby names, choosing soft blankets, and reading parenting books. Instead, nights were sleepless, silent, and filled with worry. Her doctor at Lenox Hill Hospital, Dr. Ramirez, expressed concern about Catherine's stress levels. "You need to rest," the doctor said, her voice soothing but firm. "Your blood pressure is creeping higher than it should be. If you don't take it easy, you could be at risk for complications." Catherine nodded obediently, but she knew there was no easy way to find peace when her marriage itself felt on shaky ground. Desperation overcame her, and one night she confronted Alexander directly about Rachel. He looked irritated, snapped that he was tired, stressed, and accused her of being paranoid. He denied any wrongdoing, insisting Rachel was just a business associate who happened to be around for philanthropic ventures. He made Catherine feel guilty for questioning him while she was pregnant. He spun a story so plausible, she wanted to believe him. She let it go for the baby's sake and out of her own yearning for a happy family. Yet, the truth refused to stay hidden. One afternoon, Catherine received an anonymous text message that shattered her illusions. An image of Alexander at an out-of-town spa resort, sitting by the pool with Rachel draped across his arm, the two sharing a passionate kiss. Her heart pounded painfully, tears stinging her eyes. All the rumors, the subtle shifts in his behavior, they weren't just figments of her imagination. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and more alone than ever. She tried to rationalize, to remain calm for the baby. She needed proof, a confrontation that would either salvage their marriage or give her the clarity to walk away. But her attempts to get Alexander to talk openly ended in shouting matches. Alexander insisted it was just a moment, some silly pressure from Rachel, a photo taken out of context. The more he lied, the less Catherine believed. Each confrontation sent her blood pressure spiking, her head throbbing with tension. On a stormy night, near the end of her 8th month, Catherine found herself in searing pain. It felt as though her abdomen clenched violently, her head swimming with dizziness. She tried to get out of bed, but the room spun. Frightened, she pressed her phone to call Alexander. He didn't answer. She tried again, voicemail. Panic rose in her throat. Eventually she dialed 911, barely able to articulate her address. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, whisking her to Lenox Hill Hospital. There, doctors discovered she had severe preeclampsia, her blood pressure was dangerously high, and her baby's life was at risk. That was the night Catherine made call after call to Alexander, struggling through pain, her voice trembling. She needed him to be there, to sign consent forms if an emergency C-section became necessary, to hold her hand through the terror, but every call went unanswered. She found out later that Alexander was at a private party in a hotel suite across town, celebrating the finalization of a multi-million-dollar real estate deal with Rachel Martin at his side. He'd set his phone on silent mode. Hours passed, every second a brutal test. The doctors prepared Catherine for an emergency procedure, hooking her up to IVs, monitoring the baby's heart rate, and nervously conferring in hushed voices. Catherine clutched her phone, tears soaking her hospital gown, begging for a miracle. And still no answer from Alexander. At last, the surgeons performed a C-section to save both mother and child. Catherine's daughter, whom she later named Ava, was born under bright surgical lights, her tiny cry echoing in the operating room. Catherine only caught a glimpse of her before exhaustion overwhelmed her. She drifted into unconsciousness, heartbreak mingling with relief that her child was alive. In the days that followed, Catherine recovered in a private room. She had no visitors except for a few concerned colleagues from the school and a neighbor who found out about her condition. Alexander was nowhere to be found. News eventually reached Catherine that Alexander had left the city for a business retreat with Rachel in the Hamptons. The knowledge cut Catherine like a knife, but she was still too frail from surgery and the complications to take any drastic steps. Weeks passed. Catherine tried to focus on baby Ava, cherishing the soft coos and the warmth of her daughter's little body against her chest. Yet sorrow gnawed at her heart. Not once had Alexander come to see the baby or even called to ask about her health. The hospital bills, though covered by insurance and their shared resources, piled up, each one a reminder of the lonely vigil she endured. Meanwhile, Alexander fell deeper under Rachel's sway. The two flaunted their affair, making appearances at exclusive clubs. Paparazzi sometimes snapped photos of them leaving fancy restaurants, their smiles confident and unapologetic. If Alexander thought about his new daughter, he didn't show it publicly. Catherine heard from mutual acquaintances that Alexander was living it up, freed from the burdens of fatherhood and an ailing wife. But karma has its own sense of timing and retribution. In Alexander's case, it arrived in the form of a failed offshore real estate deal that threatened to dismantle his empire. The deal, orchestrated partially by Rachel's connections, turned out to be riddled with corruption. Government officials from a European nation were involved in a bribery scandal, and Alexander's name was all over the leaked documents. As the scandal grew, negative press hounded him. Sponsors dropped out of his projects, investors pulled their money, and lawsuits loomed. Rachel, sensing the tide turning, distanced herself. She claimed she was only a consultant and had no knowledge of any illegal dealings. Rumors spread that she had introduced Alexander to the corrupt officials, then quickly removed her name from any official paperwork. Alexander was left scrambling to protect his assets, find new investors, and mitigate the fallout. Catherine watched from a distance, nursing her newborn in a small apartment she'd moved to after leaving the townhouse. She was stunned by how quickly the empire Alexander had built was collapsing. A part of her felt pity. After all, she had once loved this man deeply. But the raw hurt remained, reminding her of every moment he ignored her calls and every way he betrayed his vows. Unexpectedly, Alexander showed up at Catherine's doorstep one dreary morning. His eyes, once filled with unwavering confidence, were now clouded by panic and remorse. He apologized profusely, claiming he had been under immense pressure, that Rachel had manipulated him, that he still loved Catherine and wanted to meet his daughter. Catherine let him in but remained guarded. She introduced him to Ava, now 3 months old and starting to babble. The sight of the baby brought tears to Alexander's eyes, but Catherine stood firm. She listened to his pleas for forgiveness and claims of renewed devotion. He wanted them to reconcile, to become a family, especially now that the world seemed to turn against him. But Catherine had changed. The crisis of her hospitalization, her lonely nights, and the heartbreak of discovering his affair had transformed her. She listened quietly as Alexander laid out his regrets, his explanations, and his promises. She considered the memory of that fateful night at Lenox Hill Hospital, how she almost died, bringing Ava into the world while her husband and his mistress partied the night away. In the midst of his rambling, Alexander also let slip that Rachel had vanished with a significant sum of money funds. Alexander had entrusted to her for a charitable initiative. He suspected she'd left the country to avoid the scandal, taking everything she could. To Catherine, it sounded like cosmic justice. The very woman who'd stolen him away in Catherine's most vulnerable time had now stolen from him at his most vulnerable time. The irony was almost too bitter to taste, but Catherine reminded herself that her priority was her daughter, not revenge. Faced with an oncoming avalanche of lawsuits, frozen bank accounts, and an empty house, Alexander tried to rely on Catherine for emotional and possibly financial support. Though she had no illusions about his motives, Catherine was compassionate by nature. She allowed him to see the baby, but she made it clear she could no longer be his wife in the way she once was. Alexander tried to strong-arm her with the legal system, threatening that if she did not assist in preserving some of his assets, he would seek sole custody of Ava. His threats were a desperate, clumsy attempt to maintain control, but Catherine, who once might have cowered before such intimidation, had grown braver. She knew the courts wouldn't look kindly on a man who abandoned his pregnant wife in the hospital. Moreover, she had evidence of his affair and his lack of involvement in Ava's life. Instead of fear, she felt a fierce protectiveness. She quietly called her parents, who then introduced her to a family law attorney in Connecticut. The next few months were an arduous legal battle. Alexander's empire crumbled further as more incriminating evidence of corruption and bribery surfaced. Rachel, from wherever she was, leaked additional documents that pinned much of the blame on him. The legal machine closed in, and Alexander found himself paying massive settlements to avoid criminal charges. The once proud real estate mogul, who had soared among New York's most elite, was stripped down to a shadow of himself. Catherine, meanwhile, reclaimed her life. She had taken time off from teaching to focus on Ava's infancy, but she maintained close relationships with her colleagues and principal. They supported her, offering side tutoring gigs she could do from home to bring in extra income. It wasn't easy raising a baby alone, but Catherine found unexpected strength in motherhood. She discovered a power within her that far surpassed any heartbreak Alexander inflicted. One surprising ally emerged during this time: Alexander's father, Gerald Cole. He was an older man with a heart condition who had never fully approved of Catherine believing she lacked the pedigree for his son. However, after seeing the scandal unfold and learning how Alexander had abandoned Catherine, he felt a pang of guilt. Gerald reached out, offering financial support specifically for AVA's care. He stated he would put money in a trust, ensuring Catherine didn't have to fight with Alexander for child support. Catherine was wary, but after thorough legal vetting, she accepted the arrangement, grateful that at least Ava would have a secure financial future. In the final judgment of the divorce proceedings, Catherine was granted full custody. Alexander, facing mounting legal troubles and the collapse of his reputation, was granted supervised visitation rights at best. Catherine's attorney had compiled comprehensive proof of his neglect and unfaithfulness, along with hospital records of Catherine's complicated pregnancy and Alexander's absence during the crisis. The judge sternly admonished Alexander for his lack of responsibility. By that time, the press had a field day with the story: the millionaire who abandoned his pregnant wife while gallivanting with his mistress, only to lose nearly everything in a corrupt real estate deal. There was a bittersweet sense of closure. Catherine walked out of the courthouse, baby Ava in her arms, feeling a rush of cool autumn air that seemed to blow away the remnants of her old life. She looked up at the steel-grey sky of Manhattan, recalling how she had once stood in awe of its towering structures and unstoppable pace. Now, she felt different, less naive, perhaps, but no less determined to face the future. Alexander spiraled into a depressive state. He hopped from one cheap apartment to another, trying to keep out of the paparazzi's camera lenses. He no longer had the funds to maintain a luxurious lifestyle, and many of his former associates wouldn't return his calls. He'd become a pariah in the city he once ruled. Meanwhile, Rachel's whereabouts remained unknown. Whispers indicated she might have gone to Europe or Asia, living off the money she'd siphoned away. Some believed she would resurface when the legal dust settled, but no one could say for sure. As the months turned into a year, Catherine regained her footing. She returned to teaching part-time when Ava was old enough to stay with a trusted babysitter. The small, warm home she'd found for them was decorated with colourful children's books and sweet pictures of Ava's milestones. Those who saw Catherine now described her as radiant, a woman who had faced despair and emerged stronger. She often thought about that fateful night at Lenox Hill Hospital, the calls that went ignored, the panic that nearly swallowed her, and the miracle of her daughter's survival. Through that darkest moment, she had found her own inner light. Catherine also took a bold step. Inspired by her experiences, she began writing a series of children's books focusing on courage, kindness, and resilience. Her principal, colleagues, and even parents of her students took an interest, helping her promote these stories. The small publishing deal she landed was enough to ensure that her lessons in perseverance and love would reach children beyond her own classroom. She dedicated her first book to Ava, who in her mother's words was the greatest testament to hope and second chances. Meanwhile, Catherine's attorney forwarded a letter one day, a rambling apology from Alexander. He wrote that his life was in shambles, that he recognized how he had failed both her and Ava. He wrote he was entering a rehabilitative program for individuals facing emotional and mental crises. He asked if there might be any chance to see Ava again, to become part of her life in a more meaningful way. Catherine read the letter with a mixture of sadness and compassion. She had no desire to bar him from Ava's life if he truly changed, but she also knew that trust was earned, not given freely. Through her attorney, she allowed limited visitation for Alexander, supervised by a professional caretaker, every other month. During their first arranged visit, Catherine saw Alexander outside the therapy center in Midtown. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. He seemed subdued, humbled. He broke down crying when he saw baby Ava, who stared up at him, full of curiosity but no recognition for the man who was her father. Catherine stood aside, determined to protect her child's emotions first. She remained polite, yet distant. Alexander spent the hour trying to bond with Ava, reading her a little story, fumbling with toys as he fought back tears. While the meeting was heartbreaking in its own way, Catherine also sensed something genuine in Alexander's remorse. With time, a form of equilibrium emerged. Alexander continued therapy, grappling with his shattered pride and regrets. Catherine, for her part, focused on giving Ava the stable, loving childhood she deserved. She reminded herself daily that forgiveness is not for the other person, but for oneself to release the burden of anger. Still, it would be a long road before she might consider truly forgiving him. She protected her heart and her child, forging a new life out of the ashes of betrayal. One day, Catherine took Ava to Central Park. It was a bright afternoon, the sunlight filtering through the branches and dancing on the paths. She watched her daughter toddle around, giggling as she chased pigeons, her chubby arms reaching out to the sky. In that precious moment, Catherine recognized how far they had come. From the lonely darkness of a hospital bed, she had walked a road paved with pain and heartbreak, yet here she stood, free, strong, and brimming with gratitude for the chance to keep living, keep loving. The wind carried a memory of that phone, vibrating on a bedside table, endless rings, empty echoes. But now Catherine had no regrets. She understood that sometimes life's hardest trials can lead to the brightest dawn. She felt the warmth of the sun on her face and decided that she would no longer let her past define her. She would define it for herself, a story of survival, self-discovery, and unconditional love for the little one who had given her strength when she needed it most. Karma had indeed come full circle, delivering the harsh lesson to Alexander and Rachel. While Catherine's life wasn't perfect, it was genuine. She was free of lies, living with integrity, and the bond she shared with her daughter. In that sense, Catherine had found a measure of peace. She hoped Alexander would eventually find his own version of redemption, but she refused to let his journey derail hers ever again. Months later, Catherine's first children's book became a modest success, receiving a positive review from a prominent blog that focused on education and parenting. The recognition felt surreal, yet validating. She'd poured her heart into those pages, interlacing her own experiences of resilience into the simple, colorful narrative for children. Her principal threw a small celebration in the teacher's lounge, and her colleagues beamed with pride. Catherine, blushing at the attention, placed a copy in the school's library, hoping it might inspire future students. That same evening, after tucking Ava into bed, Catherine received an unexpected visitor, Alexander. He stood in the hallway of her apartment building, dressed simply, holding a bouquet of daisies, Catherine's favorite flowers. From long ago, she stared at him, speechless. He said he'd learned from her attorney that she'd published a book, and he wanted to congratulate her personally. He also admitted that in therapy, he'd been working on the concept of making genuine amends. Catherine nodded, accepting the flowers but keeping the door only partially open. He looked at her with eyes glistening in sincerity, or perhaps sorrow for all that he had lost. He told her he admired her strength, how she had risen above the pain he caused. He humbly asked if, someday, she might consider letting him read the book to Ava. With a careful measure of grace, Catherine agreed one day, when Ava was ready. That night Alexander left quietly, and Catherine closed the door behind him, tears slipping down her cheeks. It felt like a step forward, but also a reminder of boundaries she had every right to maintain. Over the next few months, Catherine continued forging her path. She balanced motherhood, part-time teaching, writing, and a blossoming sense of self-worth. She formed new friendships with other single mothers who understood her journey. The memory of the hospital became a scar, not necessarily ugly, but a sign of survival. Every time she walked those halls for a routine checkup for Ava, she recalled the pang of betrayal when her calls to Alexander went ignored. Yet each step reminded her she had come far beyond that despair. Word reached Catherine that Rachel had been spotted in Dubai, living off ill-gotten funds, but also under investigation by international authorities. Another tidbit of karma. Catherine tried not to dwell on it. After all, she had an entire future to focus on hers and Ava's. It was enough to know that each time someone acted out of selfishness or cruelty, they set a chain of events in motion that would eventually return to them. 1 year merged into 2. Catherine found a renewed sense of purpose. She wrote another children's book, this time emphasizing empathy and the power of sincere apologies. Critics commended her storytelling, calling it empathetic and heartfelt without being preachy. Sales picked up, and soon Catherine had an agent reaching out with bigger publishing opportunities. She felt life unfolding in a beautiful, unexpected way, something she could have never imagined while lying alone in that hospital bed. Occasionally, Alexander appeared to see Ava under the court-approved conditions. Each visit was still difficult. Ava, at first, was shy around him. Slowly, she grew more comfortable, allowing him to read picture books to her. Catherine monitored these meetings from a safe, emotional distance. She noticed how Alexander tried to show genuine kindness, a stark contrast to the cold, indifferent man who ignored her calls during her crisis. Therapy, losses, and the threat of legal consequences had humbled him. Was it enough to undo the past? No, but Catherine decided it was enough to give her daughter a chance to know her father at least in a carefully controlled environment. Alexander's father, Gerald, occasionally dropped by, bringing gifts for Ava and pleasantries for Catherine. The tension from the past was gone, replaced by quiet respect for the woman who had saved his granddaughter's life by caring for her through adversity. He once confided in Catherine that he regretted how he'd misjudged her. He admitted that in the end, money and status meant little if you lacked character. Catherine accepted his words with polite gratitude, feeling another slight release of the burdens she once carried. The entire ordeal, from betrayal to heartbreak, from near-death hospital scares to the slow rebuilding of her life, had shaped Catherine into a wiser, stronger individual. She recognized that sometimes love alone isn't enough to prevent harm or heartbreak. Boundaries, trust, mutual respect, these things matter, and when they're broken, the pain can be life-altering. But she also learned that one can rise from the ashes, forging a life richer in substance and love than before. One evening, after placing Ava in her crib, Catherine settled on her couch, looking at the city lights. She allowed herself to reflect on the chain of events that had begun on that stormy night when she was forced to call 911, her body racked by pain and her husband nowhere to be found. That memory once haunted her, but now she saw it as a turning point, a test of her own resilience and a testament to the power of motherhood. When the people she trusted the most abandoned her, she found a deep well of strength inside herself. It was that strength that cradled Ava in the hospital, that endured the heartbreak of a husband's affair, and that now fueled her newfound career as a children's author. Alexander, disgraced though he was in the business world, continued trying to salvage bits and pieces of his reputation. The scandal had cost him nearly everything, but slowly, some old friends returned with advice or small opportunities. He found work consulting for smaller real estate firms, far from the glory he once had, but at least a stable income to pay child support. He also continued his therapy, learning to face the guilt and shame he once ran from. The gauntlet of consequences hammered him relentlessly. He lost his homes, many of his acquaintances, and his once flawless public image. The lesson was harsh but inescapable, ignoring those who truly cared for him, chasing superficial thrills, and betraying his wife at her most vulnerable moment, had set in motion his own undoing. As for Rachel, her story remained shrouded in rumors. There were unverified sightings of her in luxury shopping malls overseas. Some said she was under house arrest in a remote Mediterranean villa, others that she had escaped all accountability. Catherine tried not to let these speculations bother her. The woman had no place in her life anymore. To everyone around Catherine, she became a living emblem of hope, proof that betrayal and life-threatening hardship could be overcome. Parents at school who read her books often told her, "Your stories inspired my child to talk about their feelings," or "My daughter felt understood when she read your book about being brave." Each comment reminded Catherine that her suffering had not been in vain. She was turning her pain into empathy, her betrayal into lessons on integrity, and her heartbreak into a message of healing. Eventually, Catherine found love again, not with a billionaire or a powerful executive, but with a kind-hearted archivist named Peter, who worked at the New York Public Library. They met during a children's book event where Catherine was reading one of her stories to a group of enthusiastic young readers. Peter, shy yet incredibly thoughtful, was enchanted by her warmth. They struck up a friendship that slowly blossomed into romance. He wasn't wealthy by Manhattan standards, but he was dependable, honest, and adored Ava like she was his own. Catherine, cautious at first, gradually opened her heart to the idea that there might still be men capable of genuine kindness. Alexander learned of her new relationship through mutual friends, and though it stung him, he was forced to accept reality. Catherine no longer belonged to him, and in truth, she never really had in the way he assumed. Once, He confronted Peter during a pickup for Ava, sizing him up. Peter remained polite, offering a handshake. That simple gesture seemed to further humble Alexander, who realized he had no right to question Catherine's new life after all he'd done. Time passed. Catherine's second book became even more popular, leading to a small but significant publishing deal. She devoted much of her income to Ava's upbringing, ensuring her daughter had access to good daycare, education, and a safe, nurturing environment. She also donated a portion of her royalties to Lenox Hill Hospital's maternity ward, wanting to help other mothers who might face complications. The memory of how the hospital staff had saved her and Ava never left her mind. Every once in a while, Catherine would catch a glimpse of tabloids referencing Alexander, describing his slow climb back into the business. The headlines would be overshadowed by bigger stories, but she felt a pang of recognition. She wished he would find a better path, something more grounded in values. Their interactions, when it came time for visitation, were civil. Occasionally, he would tear up after spending a couple of hours with Ava, thanking Catherine for giving him the chance to be a father, even in a limited capacity. Catherine would nod, not unkindly, but keeping her emotional distance. She had learned the dangers of letting him too close. One day, Ava, now a bright-eyed toddler, tugged on Catherine's hand and asked, "Where's Daddy?" Her innocent question pierced Catherine's heart. She knelt down, brushing aside a lock of her daughter's hair, and explained gently that Daddy lived somewhere else, and that Mommy was the one who took care of her full-time. Ava nodded, half understanding, then ran off to play with her toys. In moments like that, Catherine felt a pang of what might have been had Alexander chosen differently. Yet she also recognized that the love Ava received now was pure, stable, and unwavering things Catherine had painstakingly cultivated to protect her child's emotional well-being. Under the gentle glow of a living room lamp, Catherine often wrote journal entries to process her experiences. She toyed with the idea of writing a novel for adults based on her journey, but wasn't sure she was ready for that level of personal revelation. The children's books felt safer, a way to transform adversity into guidance for little minds. Someday, when she felt healed enough, she might write the full story. For now, she found contentment in her routine, waking up early to feed Ava, heading to the school for her part-time teaching, returning home to create new illustrations or storylines, and in the evenings enjoying dinner with Peter, who had become a welcomed presence in their little family. Each day she walked forward, further away from the pain, yet she never allowed herself to forget the lessons learned. She was stronger now, and ironically, she had Alexander's betrayal to thank for that. In the middle of winter, when a light snow dusted the city, Catherine visited Lenox Hill Hospital with a check for the maternity ward, part of her latest donation. The staff recognized her and greeted her warmly. She was introduced to a young mother who, like Catherine once was frightened for her life and the life of her unborn child. Catherine shared words of encouragement, explaining that sometimes the hardest trials can reveal an inner strength you never knew you possessed. She left that evening feeling a deep sense of peace and purpose. Fate has a way of closing circles. A few weeks later, Catherine heard through the grapevine that Alexander had begun volunteering at a local youth center, possibly as part of his therapy recommendation, or just out of a desire to give back. She smiled faintly at the news, wishing him well. She wanted no ill for him. In fact, she hoped that through service and humility, he might reclaim something decent within himself. Catherine's story became one that acquaintances whispered about in awe. People who had once seen her as merely the millionaire's wife marveled at her grace, independence, and success as a writer. No, she wasn't living a fairy tale, but she had built a reality far more nourishing than the illusions of wealth and status. She had proven that betrayal doesn't have to define you, and that the best revenge is living a life of authenticity and love. A year later, Catherine made one final major step toward closure. She arranged a private meeting with Alexander at a cafe near the school, away from any prying eyes. Ava was with a babysitter, and Catherine wanted to speak adult to adult. Alexander arrived, looking apprehensive. He knew this was important, otherwise Catherine wouldn't have scheduled such a meeting. They sat down, and after a moment of silence, Catherine told him she was ready to forgive, not for his sake, but for hers. She explained that forgiveness did not mean she wanted him back, or that she excused his actions. It meant she was releasing the bitterness and anger for her own well-being. She wanted Ava to grow up without being haunted by the bitterness of her parents' past. Alexander listened, tears forming in his eyes. He murmured a choked apology, but Catherine just raised her hand to indicate she'd heard it all before. She said she believed he was changing, and that was good for him. She thanked him for that. With those words, she left the cafe, stepping back into the bustling city, feeling a weight lift off her chest. As the months rolled onward, Catherine and Ava thrived. The children's books soared to modest but meaningful success, and Catherine found happiness with Peter. She eventually wrote that adult novel, fictionalizing elements of her journey, carefully changing details, but pouring her soul into the pages. When it was published, it resonated with many readers who had faced betrayal or unexpected life crises. Catherine's name became a small beacon of hope in literary circles that appreciated stories of female resilience. And so, from that agonizing night in Lenox Hill Hospital, when calls went unanswered and her life teetered on the brink, Catherine emerged as a testament to unyielding courage. She showed how betrayal, though devastating, could be a stepping stone to profound self-discovery and purpose. Yes, Alexander and Rachel had ignored her calls in her time of need. But Catherine had found a much more profound call, one to rise up, defend her child, and embrace her destiny as a teacher, author, and loving mother. Her story served as a cautionary tale to those who took loyalty and trust for granted, those who believed money could overshadow morals. It stood as a reminder that life's greatest wealth lies not in material possessions, but in compassion, integrity, and the power of love. And in the end, karma dealt its hand. Alexander lost the empire he'd built through arrogance. Rachel vanished into the shadows of her own greed, and Catherine, left with the scars and the lessons, finally found the peace, stability, and happiness she deserved. When Catherine first found herself on the brink of collapse in that sterile hospital room, pain, fear, and betrayal swirling around her, she believed her world was ending. Little did she know, the turmoil would lead her toward a profound inner strength she never knew she possessed. Through heartbreak and abandonment, she forged a new path filled with kindness, resilience, and an unbreakable devotion to her daughter. Life dealt her challenges that could have crushed her, but she chose to rise, transforming suffering into a testament of personal fortitude. Her triumph stands as a reminder that no matter how dark the circumstances, hope can be reignited through courage and self-belief. Amidst deceit and lost fortune, she found authenticity and love waiting on the other side of pain. If you believe in turning wounds into wisdom and obstacles into opportunities, Catherine's journey shows that redemption is possible for those who refuse to give up. Help her story inspire others to find their own strength. Please like, share, and subscribe to hear more about life's hardest lessons and the redemptive power of the human spirit. Your support ensures that these tales of perseverance continue to reach those who need them most.